Our next session is not a panel. We have a speaker, Phelim Bradley, who is the CEO and founder of Prolific. And Phelim's going to talk to us about the critical role that people will play in AI's future. And I believe he'll be speaking to some of the work that's been done with the Alan Turing Institute and the Collective Intelligence Project, and showing us how human data drives meaningful AI improvements. So I'll just wait till people at the back have found a seat, and then I will ask Phelim to come to the stage to give us his presentation. Okay, Phelim, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you a little bit about human data and the critical role that people will play in AI's past, present, and future. I'm particularly delighted to talk to you about this topic because I think it's sometimes a slightly overlooked topic and an invisible part of the AI development lifecycle. It's quite easy, I think, to view these AI models as somehow self-training systems, continuously improving themselves, or being improved by the researchers who are developing them in the frontier AI labs. But the reality is that behind much of AI lies an invisible workforce of millions of people globally. The data annotation industry employs millions of people who collectively spend billions of hours labeling data, which ultimately has given these AI models its capacity to see, understand, and interact with the world. I think it's useful to think about AI consisting of three key ingredients: compute, algorithms, and data. And the compute and algorithms are relatively shared across the frontier labs. And I really think it's data which is at the heart of these models and the ingredient, the secret sauce that differentiates your model or your application. And ultimately, not only just data, but human-generated data. For every kind of magical capability you've seen in these models, every kind of magical moment you've had with an LLM, it's likely that there's countless hours of human labor has gone in to make that possible. And fundamentally, what makes artificial intelligence intelligent is human intelligence. And one of the points I hope to get across to you today is that without intentional human integration, we risk creating untrustworthy, ineffective, or potentially even dangerous AI models or applications. Many of you will have seen, or maybe actually will ask the question to the audience, who's seen these examples of the Google's AI overview advising people to use non-toxic glue on pizza, or to eat one rock daily for your health. That's something that someone's experienced or something similar to that. And although these are trivial and somewhat amusing examples, you can imagine more serious cases. So medical chatbots giving the wrong diagnosis or incorrect advice, or completely fabricated academic citations or papers. And I think whether it's amusing or serious, these examples illustrate a critical truth, which is that these AI models have no inherent factual understanding of the world. They need to be grounded in this reality by humans and by human feedback. Fundamentally, the models are just sophisticated pattern matching systems, even though they are extremely sophisticated now, without any lived experience, and they operate primarily on kind of statistical associations rather than genuine understanding before they're kind of grounded in this reality by humans. And I think it's increasingly important that we get this human data right and the human feedback. And the consequences can obviously range from harmless absurdities to potentially life-threatening misinformation. And before we dive a little bit more into the role that human data plays in the AI development lifecycle, I wanted to introduce Prolific to you and the small but I think important role that we play in this system. So Prolific's a human data platform. We connect over 300,000 globally diverse participants to researchers and AI developers seeking to improve or understand their models. And ultimately, we see ourselves as building infrastructure that makes meaningful human involvement possible at scale. And our ultimate goal here is to try to ensure that both the best and the breadth of humanity is reflected and shapes AI development. So our platform connects both a global crowd and domain experts to these researchers for applications like data generation, curation, evaluating your AI models, providing fine-tuning feedback data to these models, user testing or stress testing the models, and also understanding the impact that these models and applications are having out in the real world. And one of the key kind of differences, and I hope I get this point across later in the talk, is that we really see participants and the people involved in this process as a community of collaborators, not just as data sources. Each person brings unique experience, cultural context, and a kind of lived experience that I think ultimately is important that we encode into our model development. And hope I also get across the point that this data infrastructure is going to be increasingly critical as these models become more autonomous, more capable, and more powerful and influential. That this diversity and representative feedback is going to be increasingly important in shaping how AI understands the world. And I've maybe already dropped a little bit of too much jargon into this talk, but I wanted to give a kind of schematic overview of all the plethora of ways that humans are involved in the development lifecycle. And the short answer is almost every step. If we start at the left side, you have what's called a pre-training. So these are the huge, expensive computational runs that people talk about, basically trained on internet scale data collection. But even at this stage, humans are involved in data curation and data annotation. As we move into the middle, we have humans evaluating and providing fine-tuning data to these models. And I think here is where human data has had the most transformative impact in recent years. This step, which many of you may have heard of, reinforcement learning through human feedback or direct preference optimization. I'm going to ask another question to the audience of hands up anyone who has interacted via Playground or via API GPT, not ChatGPT, but the raw model before it has been instructionally fine-tuned to become ChatGPT. So smattering of hands, but only maybe 5 or 10% of the audience. I think if you do have a chance to interact with these raw models, you'll find them chaotic. They don't follow instructions. They provide kind of incoherent responses. Whereas obviously our experience with ChatGPT and these models are that they are helpful, controllable, and follow our instructions. And ultimately the process and the step that has taken the model from not understanding our intents or instructions to being a useful assistant is a step of reinforcement learning through human feedback. You have human annotators evaluating the response and informing the model which one better follows the instructions or is better suited for the task at hand. And then interesting, I think the human also now has a role even later on in the AI development lifecycle when these models are being hopefully responsibly deployed into the real world, where you may need continuous oversight or evaluation these models while they're being used in production. You maybe want to sample from outputs or give these models an escalation path to a human being to hand over when it's confused or it's reached. I think a good example of this is driverless cars. If it reaches a point where it doesn't know what to do, it needs to be able to hand over to a human to give it a helping hand. And obviously, this human role in AI development lifecycle is not new. I won't ask the audience this time, but I would suspect that most people in the room has interacted with something like a Google reCAPTCHA. So when you're clicking on these buttons, this is a bike, this is a truck, this is a traffic light, which is an early example of large-scale human data contribution. But I think also highlights let's say, the legacy world of human involvement, which is this simple data labeling and categorization. Tasks are now becoming increasingly complex and sophisticated and requires more skilled human judgment. I mentioned already the impact that RLHF has had on going from these raw models to instructionally fine-tuned useful assistants. And I think there's a very illustrative example from the early days of ChatGPT, whereas I think many of us will have noticed that, especially in the earlier versions of ChatGPT, the responses had a distinctly AI feel about them, right? They just felt like they were an AI-generated response rather than the human-generated response. And one of the telltale signals of this was the overuse of the model's use of the word delve. So I will happily delve into that for you. And what was going on here? Like, why were these models overusing this word that wasn't commonly used in our English? And it turns out that the human annotators who were providing this RLHF data to the models were being hired in Africa. And in African business English, this word delve is more commonly used than in business English. And I think this kind of cultural fingerprint reveals potentially profound truth, which is that who trains your AI model matters, who provides this data matters. It can have sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle biases that may impact the end result of these models. I think the simplest way of thinking about our changing role as humans involved in the AI development lifecycle is the past. These AI models were like toddlers. They needed an explanation for everything. This is a cat, this is a duck, this is a bus. Whereas today's AI is more like adolescents. They're mostly independent and autonomous, but do occasionally need guidance or mentoring on more complex matters, or some oversight when they're going in the wrong direction. And as a result, our role is moving from basic data labeling to more sophisticated judgment-based contributions. Now, instead of telling models what to do or what the data means, we're guiding them towards more responsible outcomes, the more safe outcomes, and maybe factuality and grounding the models in the real world. I think there's a paradox here where, as these models are becoming more autonomous, they actually require more sophisticated human oversight, not less. And increasingly, our role is moving to this overseer providing vital contextual understanding to the models. And I'm going to dive into three examples of how human data can be used in the understanding of AI, both in the real world and in terms of actually developing the models themselves. And I'm hoping that the thread that is noticeable throughout these examples is this idea that who is involved in your research, who labels your data really matters, and really thinking about the people behind your data is critically important. The first example is some collaboration we did with Alan Turing Institute, led by Kobe Hackenberg, asking this very critical question, which is how politically persuasive can AI be? I think this is obviously a kind of a background risk as we're developing these models in the real world, potentially bad actors using these models to create ultra-targeted, persuasive messages. And Kobe wanted to understand how these static political messages how persuasive they were perceived by a diverse range of people. It's actually one of the largest studies that we've run on Prolific in terms of unique numbers of participants. I think we required 25,000 people, both to make sure that the research was sufficiently statistically powered, because Kobe was looking at, as these models get larger and have more parameters, do they become more persuasive? So multiple models times multiple persuasive messages. And you needed a diversity of audience. Obviously, if you're trying to understand the impact on the political process, you need people from a diverse range of political backgrounds. And fundamentally, the results here were that as these models advanced or became larger, they did become more persuasive, but with diminishing returns as size increases. It was a logarithmic curve, I believe, so maybe some hope for us yet, but still very early research. And I do think maybe highlights where this kind of evidence-based approach is going to be critical for understanding responsible AI deployment. The next example is probably one of my favorite kind of ongoing projects at Prolific, mainly because it's really stretching our ability to generate the required samples that's interested. But the person really behind this project is Divya Siddharth from the Collective Intelligence Project. And the Collective Intelligence Project are trying to bridge this gap between the rapid progress of AI and AI safety through active participation. And the ultimate goal of this project is trying to ask this question to a global population: what do you want from the future of AI? How do you want it to interact in your life? What are you concerned about? What are your hopes? And as a result, we worked with CIP and Remesh, which was the platform for creating these dialogues between the participants in the study. And we recruited over 2,000 participants across 40 countries, trying to essentially census match the population of the globe, which, no surprise, is a relatively challenging task and something that we still need to improve on. And there's the results of this project are super interesting. I'd really highly recommend everyone go check out globaldialogues.ai. And you can also, while there, ask a question to the next iteration of this study. There's a type form on the website. But I'll highlight a few kind of like key messages that came out of the first iteration of this project. The first was obviously it revealed some strong cross-cultural agreement on fundamental issues, which held constant across all demographics, ages, genders, and regions. One of these was this idea about a fear of homogeneity coming from these models. And there's a quote from a participant talking about, I care about different cultures and languages. I want to preserve them. And I think this maybe connects back to this Delve example earlier. When systems are kind of trained by particular cultures, that there is a risk that you either create this like averaging effect, where I think if you ask ChatGPT now, what's your favorite breakfast? It will tell you oatmeal or some kind of generic, like American response. Whereas really you wanted to capture the nuances of your background and your locale. And there was this risk of these centralization of these models creating a kind of a homogeneity. And relatedly, about 70% of all globally participants preferred and wanted a decentralized AI future where these AI models were not centrally controlled by governments or by large tech companies. And I will leave it to you to determine if we are on that path right now. But I think, interestingly, in general, this study revealed that there's some human value that transcends cultural differences, but also many local or demographic differences that is important to encode into these models. The final point I want to make on this is that the other consistent thread throughout the responses was that people wanted to view AI as an advisor. They were very happy, even in some sensitive regimes, to have AI as an advisor, but not as a decision maker, especially in sensitive domains like health or private information. And I really think this is an early version of highlighting that without this kind of global representative input, it's very possible for us to create models or systems that perform well technically, but are maybe misaligned with what people actually want to get out of AI development and these models in the long run. And the final example I wanted to highlight was work by Hannah Rose Kirk et al. On PRISM, which won a NeurIPS Best Paper award, and I think should also win an award for Best Reverse Backronym, as what's participatory, representative, and individualized human feedback reveals about the subjective and multicultural alignment of large language models. I'm not sure how they managed to get PRISM from that, but well done. And ultimately, this research was exploring how people's background and demographics influenced how they evaluated the performance of AI models. So typically, AI models, which many of you will have seen from the releases from the big AI labs, are done either on kind of static academic benchmarks where the answers are binary, yes, no, correct, not correct, or in places like Chatbot Arena or LLM Sys, where the models are paired off against each other, but there's no disaggregation of the background of these participants to understand who might evaluate the performance of a model differently. So I'll just aggregate it into one average score. And what I think this paper definitively showed, and I think there's other research that shows a similar thing, which is that the model performance as evaluated by humans varies dramatically across populations and domains. So another way of framing saying this is that not all, if you ask people, is the responsive model A better than model B? That is a subjective, not an objective statement. And participants from different regions can actually reach contradictory conclusions where one group may say that model B is better than model A, whereas another group might say model A is better than model B. None of this is captured in our current evaluation process, but does reflect genuine differences in how models might serve different populations or work in different domain contexts. This is something that we're hoping to build on at Prolific. So evaluating leading models at regular intervals with a global participant pool, and trying to complement some of these existing benchmarks with more nuanced human-centric benchmarks in addition to these academic or kind of technical benchmarks. And our long-term vision here is to develop domain-specific evaluations as a kind of a seal of approval in that domain, backed by experts in that domain. And I think the question that drives this work is, what good is a perfect technical benchmark score if the system fails real users in a real-world context? So this is the question we're trying to answer. And to elaborate on this thread a little bit more, obviously evaluations often lead to benchmarks, And you'll all have seen the latest release, topping X benchmark or topping Y benchmark, which are typically focused on either technical metrics or this chatbot arena style leaderboard I mentioned earlier, but may miss this kind of human experience element or human sentiment. And we're looking at trying to develop a new generation of benchmarks, which are built more around the human experience and trying to capture this in 5 key measures: preference, usefulness, ease of use, trustworthiness, and alignment, where alignment means essentially does it respect users' values and boundaries, and then hopefully being able to evaluate models on an ongoing basis. And I hope it's clear that none of the work we do at Prolific is in isolation. We rely heavily on partners for this work, and we're partnering again with the CIP, the Human Feedback Foundation, and Hugging Face on this work. But if this is something you're interested in, please come and talk to us. We would love to have a chat, see if there's ways of collaborating on this problem, and complement these technical benchmarks with human-centric metrics and domain-specific, which model, which domain, providing which outcome. And to nearly wrap up, I hope I've got the point across that human feedback directly steers AI towards preferred values and behaviors. And as these models become more capable, more autonomous, and more powerful, we must rethink how we're involved in the development of these models. I don't hear people talk about data being the new oil anymore, but I'm going to bring back the metaphor, but with a different meaning, which I think, although I think when people originally meant data as a new oil, they meant it was valuable. But I think it's also interesting to think that the existing practices or historical practices for data generation for AI are also somewhat extractive. And we want to think about what is the renewable energy approach to human data for these models that are still hungry for data and guidance, especially in expert and more sophisticated domains, and start to see people moving from data providers to co-creators, trainers, mentors, and collaborators of these models. And also, I think importantly, move this work from something that's quite hidden, a little bit of a dark secret of the industry, and bring it out into the light, make a more open and collaborative process. And on that note, I would stress that everyone in this room obviously has domain expertise that these models would love to learn from. The understanding of how these models are performing in your domain and for your use cases is extremely valuable information. And I hope that you realize that your perspective really matters in shaping our future of responsible AI development and deployment. I hope you don't mind me finishing on a plug, but you can join Prolific as a domain expert if the former statements were interesting to you. In particular, we're doing a strong drive for people with domain expertise who would be interested in helping evaluate these models or build these benchmarks. We have a workshop at 2:00, led by Andrew Gordon, and I think Lisa, I'm afraid, is not there, so Sarah Saab is going to be joining as well, in trying to understand the challenges behind being one of these annotators or evaluators of the model. And my message to you is it's harder than you think, right? This is actually quite challenging, sophisticated work now, and you might find it a little bit more challenging and build empathy with the people who are creating this data. And finally, we're both hiring and looking for partners. We have an amazing team of over 200 Prolificos. So if you're interested in collaborating or working with us on these challenging human and AI problems, please come and speak to us. We also have a booth down on the 3rd floor. Brilliant. I think we have some time for questions.
We do. Thank you. So please do send in your questions. I've got the I've got Slido open here, and I'm going to look out for hands going up. Before that, I'm going to use the take a seat. Take
sure?
a seat. Yeah,
Okay.
In the spotlight, and I'm going to stand here and we've got a gentleman here for a question. But before we get to that, I was really intrigued to see on your slides there that you've got 1 million participants on a wait list. And how do those participants come off the wait list and into that pool of participation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the wait list is currently actively managed by us, in part to manage the demographic diversity of the pool, so to make sure that the people involved roughly match the populations that researchers are interested in. So, for example, representative samples of the UK and US, and also to manage the experience on the platform to make sure that when we invite you from the waitlist, there are actually projects for you to get involved in, and you don't have a negative experience joining and being met by an empty dashboard and leaving. So it's a little bit managing the supply and demand, and then also managing the demographics of the pool.
Great.
Thank you. I'm Mark Reeder, formerly from the University of Cambridge. What do you think tools like this will do in the hands of people like Andrew Tate, a misogynistic criminal?
Do you mean tools like Prolific or the AI tools themselves?
I mean, looking at how you get around, people using good tools for bad purposes, more generally than just Prolific. Apologies for addressing the question to you, but you're here.
It's a good question. I can only really speak, I think, to the Prolific platform use case, where we do try to take an independent and an agnostic view. We are infrastructure to enable researchers and developers to build and understand models, so we don't want to have too strong a political bias, though where we kind of draw the line is in safety and consent of our participants and the human beings involved, so really making sure that the human beings who are participating in development understand what they're getting into, what their data is being used for, and they are giving consent. So that's kind of how we see our rules. I think we would obviously also draw the line. We do occasionally have to ban researchers or data collectors from the platform who are bad actors. Maybe that gives a shape of how we think about it, at least. But it's certainly a challenging problem, and I think for AI in general, maybe it goes back to my point at the start of the talk on this evaluation and overseeing of these models in production. So making sure that there is ultimately a human being in the loop somewhere, either understanding like how these models are being used, and if people are reporting negative experiences or negative behaviors, ultimately at some point a human being is able to evaluate that response and make sure it is aligned with the ethics of that platform or that tool.
I think your point about human-centric benchmarks is really important, and that diversity and voice that it brings in. How can we ensure that the big model builders are looking at that benchmark, that's playing a critical role?
Great question. Maybe firstly, I would say try to view yourselves as active participators in this model. I mean, at the moment, there are open benchmarks that anyone can get involved in, like Chatbot Arena, which is already an influential benchmark. And then I guess work with folks like us or people like behind the PRISM project in promoting other benchmarks which take into account more nuanced factors.
Okay, I'm going to take we've got questions are pouring in now, so I'm going to take a few off Slido. First one from David, which came in a little while ago, asks, how much influence does fine-tuning have over the initial training biases that were embedded during the training stages? Can it change or even eliminate them? So I think this is going back to your slide where you were showing how we can influence the models.
It's a great question. I think one point I'll maybe make is that I would say it's nearly impossible to entirely eliminate bias in your process. I think the important things to do is to obviously understand and audit where this data is coming from. So at least if you find biases in the end results, you can try to work backwards and try to identify where in the data that bias originally emerged, because it is either going to be in the kind of the pre-training data set or at some part in the process along the way, and then also find ways of, I guess, comes back to the human-driven benchmarks and the diverse benchmarks, actually try to measure and understand the bias in the model output.
So there are a few questions coming in that are around the approaches that you're taking and to inclusion in those. So first one is, what ethical approaches do you take to ensuring that African countries aren't taken advantage of in your data collection process?
Yeah, great question. So in our case, we set a global minimum reward on the platform. Although I will say that because our platform is primarily UK and US based, it's not a particular problem that we have to face. But in general, our approach is mandating at least minimum rewards for these data annotation tasks, treating our participants as kind of like first-class citizens on the platform, continuously reviewing, surveying them, understanding the impact the work is having on them, and publishing those results to our customers. Though generally, I would say, in particular, historically, maybe this has been a problem in the industry as a whole, where a lot of this work was offshored to lower-income countries, and especially some of the trust and safety data collections can have a real negative impact on people. So really making sure, again, I think measuring, talking to the participants in the model, making sure that we have some red lines in terms of the consent and ethics is the approach that we're taking. Although again, I think talking about taking this industry from this kind of dirty secret of AI creation and data annotation into the light will hopefully help with this as well, and making it more kind of democratized and open and something that people talk about. And a little bit of a bugbear of mine, but when especially open source models are released, they often open source the weights of the models and maybe some information around the technical benchmarking. They very rarely, if ever, talk about the people behind the data or the data sets that went into these models. So I think some pressure on especially the open source community to start to make this kind of auditability more of a standard process, I think would be a step in the right direction, and something that is obvious to other industries, right? So I think if you're talking about scientific research or political polling, you can't really publish the research unless you give information about how the data was collected and who was involved, what the demographics of those people are, whereas that is not yet a kind of standard in AI research publications or open source
So a question that kind of follows on from that discussion is, how do you include the digitally excluded in your work? Tricky.
that is very tricky, and I'm afraid I probably don't have a good answer for you there. It's certainly not something that we are practically able to do with Prolific right now. We are
Any ideas from the audience will be welcome.
Absolutely.
So, a further question: how do you think about annotation tasks for which there is no real ground truth, such as hate speech, misinformation, etc.?
Again, an excellent question. I think the PRISM paper that I cited is a really excellent paper, and there's a massive amount of nuance in that paper that I wasn't able to go into. But they did talk specifically, and we've done work with other collaborators on a tool called Potato, which is another great backronym, portable text annotation tool, which showed that, again, if you disaggregate the demographics of the people who are evaluating whether or not a content is harmful or not, you will get different responses depending on the background of those people, especially disaggregating those results and understanding the demographic influence can ultimately lead to better aligned models overall that are perceived as safe, not only by the dominant culture in the data set, let's say, but also by the less dominant subgroups. So I think that disaggregation of the demographics of the audience and understanding that people are not a kind of a homogenized melting pot, which will have the same opinions on what is harmful or not, is the first step.
So a very specific Prolific question. Does Prolific offer an internship program for PhD students with some experience in the field?
I don't believe we have any open intern projects, but it is absolutely something that we are open-minded to, and would love to speak to you at our booth later. Our VP of Data Science, Enzo, is in the audience, and I'm sure he would happily speak to you about this.
Great. I'm just going to ask one last question, combining a couple here about annotators, because we're running towards the end and we do need to make an announcement before you all go. So there are a couple of questions coming in about annotators, and how do you verify annotators? There have been cases of bad actors, for example, the Microsoft chatbot, and how do you protect against the human annotators using AI and LLMs to label data?
Yeah, great question. I am unfortunately extremely familiar with the fact that there are bad actors on the internet who will try to get around any identity checks in order to earn money for these tasks. I mean, this is more or less our biggest investment area in Prolific to date. It's been since founding the company a constant game of cat and mouse. We have pretty extensive verification process to the extent of more or less a similar identity validation that you'd get going and applying for a bank account, which is maybe a little bit heavy-handed, but we have had to get to that level. We have many measurements on the platform, understanding where people are people using VPN to hide their location, and are they behaving suspiciously in a way that might imply that they are using an LLM, something that we check not only during onboarding, but do continuous spot checks. And these are things that we are continually building out, and hopefully you'll see kind of new features and product launches from us, which help protect against this kind of either identity fraud or bad behavior. But it's something that is core to our mission, and the integrity of the data is our most critical kind of brand promise to people who are using the platform. So we invest very, very heavily in making sure that there are minimal bad actors on the platform skewing the results of the data.
Well, with that, I'll just say a huge thank you for a fabulous talk.
Thank you very much.